Hey, how are you guys doing? My name is Robert Snyder, and welcome to Last Week in America through the American Center Moscow. I hope everybody's having a great day. It's currently 7 a.m., and I'm broadcasting from Seattle, Washington. Weather's pretty nice here, so I hope you guys are doing well. I'm excited to get into it. First, before I get into everything, I'd love to have you guys like, comment, and subscribe on the video and the channel. The American Center Moscow brings a ton of really interesting and new content all the time that really gives interesting perspective into the life of Americans that, yeah, and I definitely subscribe and watch a bunch of their stuff. So please do that before we keep going, and yeah, let's get started. So if we could go to the next first slide, it's about me. I want to talk a little bit about myself and just first before getting into everything. So on the about me slide, I was born in New Jersey and I did my undergraduate education in upstate New York at a small school called Union College. That's actually pictured on the right. And mind you, it's upstate New York, so this is kind of I chose a pretty shot, whereas a lot of the times it's completely covered in snow. But yeah, and then after finishing my undergraduate degree, I moved down to back to New Jersey, spent a year applying to graduate school, and currently I go to the University of Washington, which is that's our library, is the picture on the left. So yeah, and at the University of Washington, I'm getting my master's in Russian, East European, and Central Asian studies, and I'm more focused on new media. So if we go to the next slide, I have some cool pictures from where I live now. So on the right, this is the where I lived in New Jersey. It's right on the coast, and you could see that's it's a big inlet for a lot of boat traffic, a lot of fishing, and it's kind of a touristy area. So what's really interesting is that it's actually the start of something called the intercoastal. So you can, as soon as you enter that inlet, the area where the boats are going in, you can take your boat all the way down to Miami and the Florida coast without ever leaving the ocean again. I've done the trip a few times and it's really cool. And it's you get a really interesting taste of all the different cultures as you move through the South, and you learn all the different people, all the different American accents. So I thought that'd be kind of interesting to share. It's kind of a unique perspective. And then on the left, Seattle usually doesn't look like this, but because it's cloudy and rainy, and that's what we're known for. But yeah, that's the city, and that's Mount Rainier in the background. And whenever on a beautiful day, we always say the Mount's out, and that means we can see Rainier. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a little background on who I am. I know some people, for any like new viewers this week, because I hosted last week. So anyway, I'd like to kind of give a little outline of what I'm going to talk about today. Is we had some holidays this past week, and that I'd like to go into. One that isn't really on the popular mainstream, and the other one which is celebrated by every American family. And then I'd like to talk about some of the presidential rallies that are starting up in the U.S. as we move into the November election process. And then finally, I'm kind of wrapping up with talking about some sports in the U.S. and how amid COVID-19 they're starting to come back. So if we can move to the slide on the holidays. So on slide 4, this is just briefly says holidays. Last week we celebrated 2 holidays in the United States, Juneteenth and Father's Day. Oh, and please, if you guys have any questions for me, don't hesitate to mention in the chat box. Good evening, Smiley Rain. I hope you're doing well today. Yeah, just please, I love to talk, and I included some kind of basic discussion questions after every major topic. Yeah, so Grapefruit Orange is Seattle, the city of Frasier. Have you ever watched the show? I have not, but my favorite cooking YouTuber, he loves the show Frasier, so he does a lot of meals from that show. He like recreates a lot of meals. It's pretty cool. But I've heard it's pretty funny. But anyway, so let's get into holidays. So last week we celebrated two holidays in the United States: Juneteenth, which fell on June 19th, which was Friday, and Father's Day, which was this past Sunday. So let's talk about Juneteenth. If we go to the next slide. So Juneteenth, it's also known as Emancipation Day. It celebrates the day that the last slaves in the United States were freed. So this took place June 19th in 1865, 2 years after the famous Emancipation Proclamation, which was a proclamation during the Civil War by Abraham Lincoln that essentially freed all slaves in states in arms. So essentially abolishing slavery throughout the South and the Confederacy, which would essentially allow them, as soon as the North would move into the territory, to be able to free all the slaves down there. So eventually, after the war, obviously this is in late 1800s. So word took time, and eventually, finally, on June 19th, 1865, in a small island off the coast of Texas called Galveston, I believe, Galveston or Gableston, forgetting. But they finally, the news made it, and that those were the final slaves that were freed in the United States. So every year since then, it is has been celebrated on June 19th as Emancipation Day, or Juneteenth, more commonly known. And the Massachusetts governor, Charlie Baker, he actually this year he proclaimed that it would be called Juneteenth Independence Day. So if we could move to the next slide, I'd love to talk about kind of the recognition of Juneteenth across the country. So Juneteenth, it's not a nationally recognized holiday. So as with many things in the United States, the states have a lot of freedom and choice on the holidays they can choose separate from the federal government. So it's similar with like driving is very differs state to state in their driving laws and how old you have to be and how long you have to do it. Like doing your test rides and stuff. So that's it just kind of falls into the state things, like every state tax differently. Whereas in the state of Washington, which is the one in the top left, there's actually no state income tax here. And a lot of the income's supplemented by like a higher state sales tax. Whereas in New Jersey, where I used to live, which is right under New York, on the right-hand side of the country, there is a really high state income tax, and there's actually no sales tax on essential goods, so food and clothing and such. So it's kind of interesting how every state is a little different with what they recognize and the laws they recognize. So that the same falls under holidays with Juneteenth. So so right now Juneteenth is recognized in every state across the country except North Dakota, South Dakota, and Hawaii. You can see the ones that it's not recognized in the white. So this map, where the red states mean that the Juneteenth has been recognized before the year 2000. Orange states, or the darker yellow states, is between the year 2000 and 2009. And then the blue states mean that they're the most recently recognized, were in 2010 and on. So so it just kind of shows you the difference with the process of recognizing certain things and such across the country. And the white states aren't recognized, the very blocky states in the middle of the country, North Dakota and South Dakota. Honestly, I drove through South Dakota on my way out to Washington. It was really cool. There's a lot of national parks, and it's probably most famously known for Mount Rushmore, but they have this really cool national park called the Badlands, where I guess it's kind of like it's a very old swamp, I believe, that's become a giant desert with really interesting topography, and they find a ton of dinosaur bones there. Anyway, I digress. It was pretty interesting. So yeah, so that's Juneteenth, and I'd like to get in to the next slide. I talk about some of the celebrations that they do for Juneteenth. So, like the U.S. Independence Day, Juneteenth is celebrated with barbecues and traditional American soul food. So, brisket, pulled pork, hot links, watermelon, and any red soda, and any red soda and soft drinks and such. So, the use of red is rumored. It's not 100% known in fact, and I wrote down some other theories that I'll explain. Is rumored to represent the blood and suffering of slaves in America, but the origins are really unknown. So one idea is that, I mean, first off, you see the red dresses of the gospel singers celebrating Juneteenth. That kind of just resonates the red. But some of the other reasons might be that red corn is really was used in the South and to create whiskey. So that could be a reason why it's used for red, or some traditional dishes from the Congo, where a lot of American slaves find their origins, are red. So not 100% known. But anyway, so we have a question from Grapefruit Orange. Personally, I learned about Juneteenth just this year. How well known is this holiday in the states where it is recognized? Honestly, I didn't really. I've heard of it before, but I didn't really know of it mainstream until this year, and I'm going to kind of talk about that, and I think that might be echoed through the kind of an exploring of a new consciousness for a lot of Americans to and a new understanding that's kind of been brought on by the George Floyd protests. So yeah, I didn't really. I've never personally gone to any celebrations or anything. I've seen them before, but yeah, when I was pulling this together, I learned a ton about the holiday and the significance of it, and I was really surprised and think it's really important and cool to celebrate, and shows really a powerful message. But yeah, so if we could move to the next slide, I'd like to talk more about the celebrations. So further festivities include marches and speeches to spread awareness of Black oppression and celebrate freedom and respect for all cultures in the United States. And many museums and other cultural buildings host events and discussions throughout the day. So I guess, yeah, I guess we've seen during the celebration, I know walking around my city, there was a lot of marches and a lot of people speaking on the issue. And I was looking up, and I got a bunch of emails for and Facebook invites and such for at museums. There had displays, and they had speaker series and the sorts to kind of go in and talk about Juneteenth and understand it and kind of really publicize it and become. And I know there's been recent debate that it's going to potentially, I mean, I don't know how accurate that it actually will be, but it will be recognized as a national holiday as opposed to just a statewide holiday, which I think would be a really big turning point to it. But for it, and I know this year all the restaurants were closed on Juneteenth, and we actually just started opening up really amidst COVID-19 and such. So it was, yeah, people took it really seriously this year. And yeah, I wanted to, if we could go to the next slide, I'd like to show some kind of how it has been celebrated kind of through pictures and such. So in here we have our our first picture, and this is actually a Juneteenth rally and speaker series, as shown in this is from Atlanta, Georgia, and this culminated. I believe this was the end of a large march that they went around, and this is clearly this is still amidst large social movements against police brutality and the promotion of Black Americans through the George Floyd, which that sparked that, I guess, almost 3.5, 4 weeks ago now. So yeah, so this is Atlanta, Georgia, and yeah, I mean you could say it's pretty big. So, and then if we can move to the next slide, I have another picture, and this is a rally in Washington D.C. So you could see how Juneteenth has kind of become synonymous and joined and augmented the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and become something bigger. Also, I really like this guy's roller skates. They're pretty cool. It's pretty retro. So yeah, it's definitely grown in popularity very recently, and yeah, and I'm excited to learn more and start celebrating and such next year. So anyway, and then if we can move to the next slide, we have another march, and this took place in Brooklyn, actually. So this, as you can see through the signs, there's the still large murals of George Floyd, and the call, which has been no justice, no peace, throughout a lot of the protests. So I think that they've definitely come together, and Juneteenth has been used really to spread a ton of awareness throughout the U.S. And yeah, so it's definitely interesting. And then if we could move to my final picture, it's this is just I just kind of wanted to show this, and this is also in Brooklyn. I just kind of wanted to show how integrated this is Juneteenth has become through the protests, because I wanted to still mention the protests a little bit this week, even though I covered it pretty heavily last week. I still think it's kind of important, and it is still going on in the United States, and there's marches all the time. So yeah, please, if you have any questions about Juneteenth, I'd love to hear them, and I'd like to move to the discussion section for this part of the presentation. And so my question is, the emancipation of the serfs in Russia took place at a similar time in history. Emancipation took place in 1861. Are there any holidays in Russia to celebrate Alexander II's emancipation? And if so, how are they celebrated? So obviously, I was a history major. And this is kind of my Russian history, late imperial history was my time period of interest. So I wanted to know if there's anything, and apparently I'm not 100% certain on this. I tried to do some digging, but couldn't find any concrete. From what I've heard and what a few of my history professors have told me is that Abraham Lincoln actually reached out and used and tried to communicate with Tsar Alexander II to kind of talk about how serf emancipation went and what strategies were used there to kind of try to implement them into the United States population with the emancipation of slavery, which occurred only 2 years later. So I thought that was kind of a really cool tie of U.S. and Russian history together. So yeah, please, if anybody has anything to offer on this or any just questions on Juneteenth in general, I'd love to hear them. And yeah, so okay, well, it seems like we don't have anything at the moment, so I'm going to move on with my presentation. And please, if you'd like to revisit it, don't hesitate to say something. And let's go into the next item. Let's talk about Father's Day, this is something that I've celebrated. This is kind of celebrated U.S. holiday. So I mean, it feels like in the back of my mind, it's like, oh yeah, it's Father's Day. So In the United States, Father's Day is celebrated on the third Sunday of June. I don't know why they do this a lot. Okay. Okay, cool. We have a comment saying from Yatak Bustarasti. I don't think this event is celebrated in Russia these days. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me, I guess. I mean, it's an old event, I guess. I don't know. I mean, it's clearly important in like Russian imperial history, but I guess yeah, I don't know. That's interesting though. Thank you for your comment on that. Um, yeah. So let's get into Father's Day. So in the U.S., Father's Day is celebrated on the third Sunday of June, and a lot of holidays in the U.S. fall on the first Monday of yeah, for Labor Day, it's the first Monday of September, or Memorial Day, I believe, is the third Sunday of May, and it's never like a set date. It's always they try to like I think they always try to like skew the holidays because these are more national holidays to align with more or less people's work weeks to make it kind of gives people a long weekend, and how this is how a lot of these are viewed. Like Labor Day and Memorial Day weekends are big weekends in the United States where everybody might take Friday off from work or a half day Friday to get Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday off and have like a long weekend because in the U.S. vacation days are typically relatively tighter for what you can take. And a lot of things are still open on these national holidays to kind of facilitate the celebration of it and such. So, and on Father's Day, families celebrate close members of their families that are dads. So, like husbands, fathers, and grandfathers. Like my mother would give my father a gift for Father's Day. It's not directly to your parents. It's just kind of celebrating anybody who is a father in your community. And typically, this is kind of a more intimate holiday really would be the way that you would I guess that you how you would talk about it, where it's mostly focused on just the family, like in your immediate nucleus, and you wouldn't really wish someone else's father happy Father's Day. Really, it's just kind of like I'll call him. I called my dad and wished him happy Father's Day. I got him a gift, and unfortunately, my family still lives over on the East Coast, so I was unable to physically go and see them. But yeah, so we have a question from Sweetie Lizzie. What kind of gifts do dads frequently get? Is there something special? So there's kind of a joke gift in the U.S. for what you get your dad for Father's Day, and it's a tie, like a necktie, like for work and stuff for formal occasions. So it's kind of a joke gift that it's like this, I guess, stereotypical Father's Day gift where like if you give your dad a present and he'll be like, is it a tie? And you're like, no, it's not a tie, but it's kind of it's kind of a running funny joke through it. But I didn't, you typically, I don't know, you could, people, you get them shirts and stuff. A lot of times people, if they don't want to spend actual money, they'll go and just spend the day with him and be like, let's go, I'll go golfing with you. I just want to spend time with you. Is that's really common. And so unfortunately, typically in my family, I'll go over my father and grandfather, who I'm very close with, and we'll go and do a barbecue or something and just hang out during the day or try to get by the water and just relax and such. So yeah, that's kind of typically what it is. I got my dad a face razor, like an electric razor this year and such. So yeah, so yeah, and then we have Ostlander says, I suppose that day is Day of Red Resolution, 7th of November. Oh, the Day of Revolution. Okay. Interesting. Okay. I wonder. Yeah, I guess that is interesting. If I wonder if did they directly celebrate previous history in that day? Because obviously that celebrates the revolution of, and I wonder if they hold any sympathies towards the early. I guess you could call it the Tsarists as more of an early part of revolution, but Anyway, that's interesting. So if we can move to the next slide, we've got our presidential tweet. So from President Trump, he tweeted out Happy Father's Day, and this is kind of a really important. I don't know. A lot of well, almost all presidents do it, and a lot of the major politicians will go and hop on Twitter and tweet something out about Happy Father's Day or any really of the major holidays, saying like a happy something, something, and with a little bit. I know my local governor posted a lot of him and pictures with him and his kids and such, and it's kind of nice, and it definitely relates politicians in the political life to to the everyday American, and yeah, so I just wanted to include that, and this is right from his Twitter. So I'd like to move to the discussion part for this thing. I mean, so is a holiday like Father's Day celebrated in Russia? If so, what is it called and how is it celebrated? When does it take place? Yeah, so I'm not really sure on all the Russian holidays, but I'd love to learn more. And if you guys have something similar to Father's Day, I would assume so. I think it's pretty common. And we have, in the U.S., we also have Mother's Day. And I remember I asked my mom when I was a lot younger, probably like 12 or 13, and I don't know why this resonates with me. I remember I asked her, I was like, oh, Mom, it was Mother's Day. I was like, what day's Kids Day? And she looks at me and she goes, every day's Kids Day, Bobby. Come on. So I'm wondering if you guys have anything similar to either Mother's Day, Father's Day, kind of like what are some, if not, like what are some really big family holidays that you guys, where you would mostly just spend time at home with your family and just do, and like more of like celebrating your parents and such. So I guess what are some, oh really? So you guys have started to celebrate this holiday recently, but not an actual Father's Day itself. Okay, interesting. Interesting. What are you guys, most of your guys' holidays focused around? I know that Easter is big and New Year's is big. Here in the U.S., I guess our big national, super secular holidays that aren't focused with the church at all or religious are Thanksgiving is kind of the big one. But okay, it's called Father's Day too. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, we celebrate Thanksgiving's kind of the big one, and then 4th of July is, I guess, Independence Day, which actually took place on July 2nd, but I think they post-dated the Declaration of Independence for July 4th, so it would land on a weekend or something like that. I know my younger brother, he's born on July 2nd, and he always talks about it. It was like, could have been 2 days. Okay, also like it's like a Google notification. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I get that. It's funny. Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, they're big. It's like you'd always remind, like I went around talking to my friends, like, oh, it's Father's Day. What'd you get your father? It's kind of, yeah, it's not like people don't take off really. I mean, you might take off from work, but nothing's really closed on Father's Day or Mother's Day. Everything's still open, and it's kind of customary to go to brunch and with your mother on Mother's Day. Yeah, okay. It's similar to that. I mean, it's kind of interesting. Cool, guys. Anyway, I'm gonna move on from Father's Day and Mother's Day now, but please keep comments coming, and I love to read them and talk about them. So, anyway, if we can move to the next slide, I'd like to talk about. Oh, so New Year is the big one. Yeah, that's what I've always been told when I was studying language and such. And I actually have a good friend from Russia, and her and I will text Novum Gadam on New Year's. But okay, what do you guys typically do for New Year's? Do you guys go and just hang out with your family, or is it more of like in the U.S. it's a little bit more of like a party kind of holiday where everybody there's a lot of pressure to make something a big deal and do stuff. So, anywho, but yeah, please all you guys, something I'm gonna keep going and get going through. And let's talk about some of the presidential rallies. So on this next slide, we have the presidential rally season. So President Trump kicked off his election campaigning season with his long anticipated presidential rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And attendance was much lower than anticipated for the Trump campaign staff. So I guess, so he announced it about 3 weeks ago. And obviously with COVID still a big thing, it's been like up in the air for whether or not it's a good idea, and there's been a ton of debate about whether or not we should be starting this, but it is a really important process for people sorry, not celebrating, I'm still thinking holidays, but for like people on presidents and in the electoral process to go and have these large rallies across the states to kind of garner your support. I mean, we're at the point in the election where there's two candidates and it's Donald Trump versus Joseph Biden. So, yeah, so now it's kind of like the rally season has really started, and this was the first one. I know President Biden said he would not presidential candidate Biden, sorry. He's been postponing all of his debates and such, like the big ones on TV. Typically, by this point, they'll have gone head to head in debates multiple times already. So he's postponing. I believe he's starting in August or September. I think the actual debates are start. So I think it was pretty notable to show that we have our first one. There's a lot of controversy and behind just it and COVID still happening. So yeah, and then as you can see, it seems emptier than in years before. In the past, typically the stadiums and stuff sell out and are just packed in the U.S. And they'll go. I mean, this is Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I think this is where the college basketball team plays or football team. I'm not 100% sure. But typically they'll sell out and there will actually be large crowds on the outsides of the stadiums who are trying to get in and watching the live feed. So anyway, so yeah, so attendance was just much lower, and I think that's a miss COVID. So if we can move to the next slide, we have another picture of President Trump with the rally here, and you can see in the top bleachers it's just a little empty. And from reading, I've heard that he wasn't happy about the turnout, but it's politics. So yeah, and I mean, you can see a lot of people aren't wearing masks. So I think we should kind of talk about this and coronavirus and such. And if we can move to the next slide 19, we can talk about COVID-19 in the elections. So there's been a criticism of the president for continuing his campaign during COVID-19 mostly from across the aisle, or that's what we would say from, I guess, Democrats, because he's a Republican candidate. They've been criticizing him for continuing this process during like a global pandemic. And I know that officials of Tulsa were not necessarily happy that there would be a large presidential rally or just a large gathering in general, just because they didn't have they made statements that they didn't have like the medical infrastructure to really keep up if there was a massive spike. And unfortunately on Monday, so it's Wednesday now, so 2 days ago, we saw a large spike in COVID cases, the largest actually since in general. I mean, it was at a gradual increase in Tulsa, in that county, but we saw the largest spike the day after Monday. So I don't know with testing whether or not you could really necessarily attribute it to this specific rally or this specific event, but you can kind of, I guess you can gauge and hypothesize that it could be that, because typically it takes a few days for people to for symptoms to develop and people to actually go get tested, and then those numbers to come out and be official. But so far the as testing has gone up, the numbers have gone up. So yeah, so we have a question from Oslander. Do you think coronavirus situation will change terms of presidential race? How will they collect people in stadiums? It could be dangerous. Yeah, so I think it definitely is going to be interesting with how it affects the elections. So it's kind of, since it's such a big part of these rallies and political rallies are such a big part, and these, especially the debates, are really big because they're nationally televised, and even a lot of the rallies are televised typically on the news site that most covers a certain party. News source, they'll televise these things. So I think it could be definitely, it's going to have an effect. I think it'll have an effect, and I don't think it'll have an effect with voter turnout. I think that there's going to still be a very high voter turnout, especially much higher than the 2016 election. So I'm not 100% sure how it will affect. We can only speculate. I think people it definitely could be very dangerous, and I don't know if it's necessarily the right decision for prevention of the case, but it's kind of the way it is, and I don't really know what preventative measures that people are taking at these rallies. I know that COVID-19 has kind of become a little politicized in the U.S. with how it's treated by each party, on how it's treated, whether or not it's err on the side of caution or Americans are sick and tired of it. That's kind of the two really rhetorics that we've found develop over the course, especially as we get closer and closer to the election. I think it might be used as like it's kind of turning into more of a political platform, where in the reality it is a dangerous disease, and we haven't really done enough, and there's no vaccine or anything in the U.S., so it's definitely difficult. And so it was a good, awesome question, Auslander, and comment. That kind of brings us into our discussion of COVID-19. If we could go to slide 20. So COVID-19 and presidential rallies. Presidential rallies are an important part of gaining support for. What are some measures that can be taken to prevent the spread of COVID at large gatherings? And in your opinion, is it worth it to hold larger events before the creation of a COVID-19 vaccine? And kind of for the second question, I don't want that just to be focused on presidential rallies, because there's also been talk of like larger events really starting in the U.S. and whether or not it's kind of it's a really big debate on whether or not it's worth it, because people are like herd immunity. People, I don't know. I don't really know. So I think some measures that could be taken to prevent the spread of COVID at larger gatherings would be just kind of spacing out seating. So I know in airlines, they're supposed to. I've heard cases of overbooked flights where it hasn't been the case, but they're supposed to cross off the middle row for every seat, and everybody has to wear a mask, and masks are provided, and just kind of they stopped with typically like drink service and stuff on airplanes to like minimize interaction between the staff and the customers, the people who are flying. So that could be a measure that could be taken, as kind of limiting where people are sitting and how many people can sit in a certain area. But it also, people will start to question, be like, well, they're in my immediate household anyway, why can't we just sit together? And it kind of becomes a larger debate on whether or not personally, whether or not you want to follow these regulations or not. So I don't know. I mean, as we start to open up more and more in the U.S., and my county that I lived in, we just entered phase 2. So it's restaurants and bars and shops and barber shops are all starting to really open up. So they're, Yeah, it's kind of like the measures. Like I've gone out a few times to some restaurants and stuff, and the big measures are whenever you're not at your table, you have to be wearing a mask. And since in our county it's 5 people max at a space, so um, yeah, it's kind of they kind of try to limit it to only, so it's only 5 people at a table. And I remember I was with well, we had 2 friends trying to meet up with us at a restaurant over this past weekend, and they had to go sit somewhere else because that's fine. That's how it is, and that's how it should be. I think there should be these measures really taken. Yeah, I'm gonna kind of get into more of like the larger events in my last part of this last week in America. We're kind of talking more about sports. So I don't really know how if it really would be worth it to hold larger events. I think that kind of the general consensus for sporting events is among the sports themselves. They don't want to be held liable for the spread of COVID-19. And God forbid someone gets it and dies. It's not. You don't want to be responsible for that. Yeah, so of course the race is important, but not so much to risk, I suppose. Online debates could be a best option. Yeah, they could be. No, I agree. I think that would be a good way for the candidates to address each other. I think it might have been, the virus is becoming a little too politicized in some ways where that's not going to be the case because it's kind of get out, we want to get out, and we shouldn't yet. It's kind of a hot button political issue. It's kind of turned into that, unfortunately. I think the issue with the online debates would be it kind of lacks like the intimate feelings that come around with going to these speeches and stuff are really important for swaying people who are on this edge, like who are straddling the line of whether or not they're going to vote left or right this come this election. So I think that's what you'd lose is the larger. And I know some presidential candidates are known for their very witty retort, and even like I took classes on through Zoom online in this past term, and even like you kind of find yourself talking over each other. You'd be like, oh wait, oh no, you go ahead and finish, you know? So it's kind of, I feel like that's a little lost. But yeah, anyway, so I'd like to at this point, yeah, I think Tatiana Orlova says, I think it is better to prevent gathering of people, otherwise the second wave of COVID-19 may arise. Yeah, I definitely think that we should err on the side of caution. I memean, we've done been in quarantine for so long. I mean, I understand, I get that people are sick of it, but I think definitely stopping these larger gatherings and stuff might be the right move in the long term. You know, it's not how. Yeah, so I don't know. It's kind of it's a tough question to ask, but anyway. So I'd like to move to slide 21. And talk about my last topic, U.S. sports. So in this picture, you can see some basketball players and Walt Disney World. So I thought this was kind of a funny, interesting story that the sports podcast I listen to has been kind of covering it a lot. So the National Basketball Association, the NBA, is planning a large comeback at Disney World next month. So starting on July 7th, all players and their families from 22 teams will move into Disney World to continue their season. During this period, players will be unable, I guess is not really the right word, but they won't, it's like very frowned upon, I guess. There's a lot of pressure for them not to leave the resort. And if they do, they'll have to undergo a 14-day quarantine upon re-arrival. So I thought this was really an interesting way for how they're trying to continue the season and keep the money flowing through the NBA and just for the entertainment purpose. So it's kind of funny because they're all the players, and I believe they can have their immediate families, and then they could choose some people to come with them and be a part of the it's kind of crazy that they're just kind of like living in a resort, and playing basketball and stuff. And I know it's kind of funny because a lot of these players have a lot of beef with each other, and because it's such a small sports world, because the teams are only, I mean, it's five, I believe 8 players on a team, so it's a really small world, and I think it should be pretty interesting and funny. I think there's going to be some funny news stories arising. Oh, and the press is allowed to stay with them. So if we can move to the next slide, we could talk about kind of what else they're able to do. So at NBA, Disney World, so players and their families will have access to large parts of the resorts and amenities, including television lounges, barbers, spa services, movie screenings, DJ sets, bowling, and ping pong areas. They can also golf and go on hiking and biking trails. So this is kind of interesting because it's like trying to keep it quarantined. Like, okay, there's going to be no fans during the games, which should be really interesting in itself. But yeah, so it's going to be it'll be kind of funny to see that it's kind of like a self quarantine, but it's kind of creating this little club party thing going on. And I know that for the preventative methods for COVID. What is secret of successful throw? Hard to make it spin. I don't understand your question, Osler. I don't know what reg by ball is. Yeah. So this is kind of going to be very interesting, and I know some preventative measures being taken by Disney World and the NBA are like the players can golf with each other, but they can't have caddies, which is someone who I assume you guys know what caddies are, but someone who follows them and carries the clubs for them, and they can't have carts. So all the players have to carry their own clubs and walk the courses. And for the ping pong or table tennis, they can't play doubles, which I think is really interesting, where you could have all these things where they can do everything, and then you're like few little tidbits of like, we have to social distance now. No, we can't. You can't play table tennis with a partner, but you can play against someone. So I think it's pretty interesting. So if we move to next slide, I'd like to kind of talk about this a little bit. So to limit the transmission of COVID-19, players are unable to have golf caddies and only play singles and ping pong. Do you think this will be effective at minimizing spread? Can you think of more effective precautions that could be taken? So, yeah, I know, and we also, on a side note, while you guys think about that, and if you wanted to chime in, please do. But we also have the Major League Soccer is having a tournament, and it's a limited team tournament too, so they're coming back. And I heard, the American football. Oh, okay, rugby ball. Yeah, we should all play sports online. Yeah, professional online gaming is going to be the future, right? Yeah, no, it is. I used to play quarterback back in, I guess, when I was young, like 13 years old, and I never got the spin down, and that's why I didn't continue, and my career never really took off. So, but it is difficult, I guess. Yeah, it's difficult. It's all about, you got to keep your fingers on the laces, and it's all about your throwing motion and your release, because it's different from throwing like a baseball or just any other ball. But yeah, so we have the MLS, and then I heard today, actually, this morning, that the American baseball is coming back. So that should be interesting. I know they had some debate between the the players and the coaches on getting paid and how much money they should be getting paid if they're only playing half a season, because I think they're playing 60 games, and typically I believe there's 152 games. So it's just over a third. So there's a little some financial discussions going on, but they figured that out, and they're going to come back. And I believe all of these are going to be stadium fanless. And then finally we have hockey's coming back too, which is I'm a huge hockey fan. I'm a really big New York Rangers fan, so I'm kind of excited to finally start being able to watch that again. So they're going to do a 24 team tournament in 2 cities. Yeah, grapefruit orange. I think you're describing what they're trying to do at Disney World. I know there's been talks about I think these are all kind of jokes or a little bit about like there's been conversations about like having sports on like a giant cruise ship that'll keep everything on. It'll sail the ocean while all the players would play out their seasons. But yeah, I think some players are coming out and saying they don't want to play, they don't want to risk spread, and there's a lot to be lost when you're not playing in front of fans, because I feel like a lot of players have said and expressed feelings that they really like playing in front of the crowd. I mean, that's a big part of it, you know. So in the case of Russia, have any sports started to come back at all? I know. I'm not sure when the KHL season really is, because I know hockey's really big over there. But do you guys like, is the Russian Premier League playing at all? I'm actually I don't really follow them, but I'm a Zenit St. Petersburg fan. But yeah, I agree. So Grapefruit Orange says, on a serious note, I think there are too many people involved in the sports industry apart from players to have any effective measures against the spread of COVID-19. I agree. I mean, it's a whole entire world that to have the staffs are just huge themselves, and they all have families too. It's definitely risky to restart it. But yeah, please let me know if there's any Russian sports on now, or what your guys' plans are with that. I love to find out and learn more. But yeah, so I guess at this point I'd like to move to my final slide, which just has questions. I mean, but I'd like to see if you guys have any like prevailing questions that you'd like to ask me first off on anything on the presentation. Totally. I'd like to definitely focus more on that. But if you have any more general questions about me, I'd love to answer as long as they're appropriate and such. So, yeah. But please just fire away. I know. Yeah. I'm excited. This week's started really nice out in Seattle. So I'm trying to get on a bunch of hikes and such. I drove about an hour yesterday and went into the mountains, and there's a cool hike with a waterfall and such around here. So what's in the cup? It is coffee. It is coffee. It is 7:54 in the morning right now. So I'm just starting my day. So guys, I just want to say thank you very much for everything. It was awesome chatting with you guys today. I hope you learned something about last week in America. Before I sign off, please like, comment, and subscribe on the video. I'm going to look through the comments before I make these kind of presentations and such to see if there's any topics that people want to learn about, because I know I saw a lot of you guys last week. So yeah, well, thank you very much. Yeah, and until next week. So yeah, like, comment, subscribe. Well, thank you very much, guys. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I guess enjoy your evening over there. So, anywho.